episode of Preferred Walk On, a PFF college football show. I'm your host, Max Chadwick. We've got a very, very special guest on right now. That is Dane Brugler, who's an NFL draft analyst for The Athletic, one of the most well-respected draft analysts there is. Dane, thank you so much for coming on, man.
No, the pleasure's all mine. Thanks, Max.
Of course. So the first question I want to ask you before we get into some of the prospects that we should be watching on Saturdays this year is, the thing that you're most well known for is the beast. There's this massive NFL draft guide that you put out every year, over 400 scouting reports, as in depth as you'll find. I wanted to ask you just how time intensive is putting that entire thing together. And have you already started a little bit on the 2024 process?
Oh, there's no doubt. Yeah, it's a 365-day type of process, and there's always nuggets you're pulling during last year's draft class for future draft classes. You're talking to coaches, you're talking to scouts, players, and inevitably different names come up that maybe aren't draft eligible yet. And so you're picking up these little things that you can use for next year, whether it's background information or something about their game that a coach tells you, actually, our best man cover guy is actually this player. And so, you're picking up all these things that you just kind of tuck away for the future. And then the summer, I try to take May and recharge the batteries a little bit, coach my son's baseball team, my daughter's softball team, but then jump right back into it June, July, August, where that's the base, set the foundation for what this upcoming class is going to be. And so it was a busy summer of watching a lot of tape, talking to a lot of my contacts around the league, trading that information. So I'm ready for new tape. Yeah, we got a little bit over week 0, USC, Notre Dame, heck, even UTEP. But excited for week 1 here, where we'll have new tape. So talking about actual stuff going on the field with the upcoming season.
So you mentioned USC right there. I wanted to ask you about this because you're number one. You put out a top 50 big board before the season starts, and your number one player shouldn't be much of a surprise. Is the reigning Heisman Trophy winner, Caleb Williams. I wanted to ask you, though, as someone who's been doing this for a very long time, do you think he has the chance of entering the same vein as Trevor Lawrence and Andrew Luck as far as the best quarterback prospects we've seen in recent memory?
There's no doubt. He has that type of ability. For me, I've been doing this for 15 years now. Just off the top of my head, I think the best quarterback prospects I've ever evaluated, Andrew Luck being 1, Joe Burrow is actually 2, and then Trevor Lawrence 3. Caleb Williams could get into that top 3. Even knock off Trevor Lawrence, get to that 3rd spot. Who knows? He has that type of ability. It's just it's the physical traits that he offers with the mobility. The arm strength is plus. He has a good sense for where he needs to be on the field, but also just the decision-making process. It's very instinctive. He's a poised playmaker. We know that Lincoln Riley offense helps the scheme that he brings, but Caleb Williams is what makes that scheme come alive. And you see it on every single tape. There are some concerns, obviously with he almost welcomes that chaos. And that's something that happened with Bryce Young last year out of Alabama. He bring it on. Because if you are, going to give me that extra time, I'm going to find somebody open. And with Caleb Williams, he'll pass up that easy layup for trying to find something bigger. And so maybe just the decision-making process needs to continue to improve. His efficiency processing and understanding, okay, how much time do I spend on read 1 before I need to get to 2 and 3 in my check down? And so just some of that part of, and that's something that you would expect from a sophomore quarterback. Like, he's still young. We have to remember that. So going into year 3 at the college level, year 2 at USC, there's some new targets around him. No more Jordan Addison. The defense looked a little suspect. So, he's probably going to be in a lot of games where into the 4th quarter, he's going to be throwing the football. So very eager to see Caleb Williams this year and see how he can even further develop his game.
I love the point that you made of him inviting the chaos, because I completely agree with you. I think the USC offensive line might be the most underrated unit in the country. It seems like, they're getting beat every play, it seems like, but really it's because Caleb's holding onto the ball for 3.5 seconds when most quarterbacks are holding on for 2.5 seconds. So I completely agree with you there. Another guy that you have close to Caleb Williams, at least, is Drake May, who's your number 3 overall prospect right now. I wanted to ask you, do you think it's a clear 1 and 2, or do you think that Drake May has a chance to possibly overtake Caleb Williams when it's all said and done?
It's not impossible. I mean, there are some smart people around the NFL who definitely have Drake May as that top guy, and it's nothing against Caleb Williams. It's more they're just so optimistic about Drake May and what he could be. I think there's, you watch him and you can see the Justin Herbert vibes. Being a strong arm passer who has the athleticism, has the smarts. We have to remember he was just a redshirt freshman last year, a guy that barely saw any action at the college level. He steps in and he has this type of production. So I think physically, mentally, he's just incredibly impressive. He can work through his progressions. His vision is definitely a strength of his. It's above average. He can read coverages. So based on what he did as a freshman, it is easy to be over the moon excited about Drake May. Now, okay, what's he going to be? What's going to look like in year 2 when new play caller, new system, no more Josh Downs and his 120 targets. So, there's a little bit of changeover in North Carolina that we'll see Drake May. He decided to stay put. He had plenty of offers to enter the transfer portal, go somewhere else. Georgia, Alabama, there are plenty of schools that would have loved Drake May to transfer. He decides, North Carolina is his place. That's he's got family connections there, obviously. He decided to stay put. We'll see how that plays out this year as North Carolina goes through a little bit of a identity change on offense. But Drake May, he's got the goods.
Yeah, absolutely. And your top 4, it's not too many surprises there. You got Caleb Williams, Marvin Harrison Jr., Drake May, Olu Fashanu. Number 5, though, is where it gets a little spicy. And I love this from you. You have Amarius Mims from Georgia, the offensive tackle, at number 5, who, wasn't even a full-time starter last year. What is it about Mims's game, though, that we should be, really keeping an eye on him in this tackle class?
This guy is so talented, man. I tell you, it's funny. So the Ohio State tape from the college football playoff game, I'm watching that. I'm like, who is this? This right tackle? And okay, he's draft eligible. All right, so I'm gonna watch him. And that Ohio State tape was just unbelievable. And I remember I texted one of my buddies, Southeast area scout, and I said, have you watched Mims yet? He said, well, I'm going to Georgia later this week. I'll let you know. And he texts me like a week later and says, all right, oh my gosh, yeah, you're right. Like this guy is, he's going to go high. And with 2 starts, you can tell right away just the high level traits, the tools that he offers. 6'7", 330, every bit of that. But he's got this twitch to him. It bursts out of his stance. He's got long arms. He's powerful. And he's a former 5-star guy. So it's not like I'm unearthing this, nobody that nobody's ever heard of. Let me say that. But he is a guy that right away you can tell he's different. He's got something to him. And so, I love Olu Fashanu. Last year he was my number 5 overall player before he decided to go back to school. I knew coming into the summer, I'd be very, very high on him. I did not expect to be giving almost an identical grade to another tackle. But I think that just speaks to Mims. And you know what? Every summer I kind of have one of these guys where it's like, all right, I'm going to bet on the traits, even though I know nobody else is talking about him like this. Nobody else has him highly ranked or this highly ranked. But like Christian Gonzalez was my guy last year. He was like my 6th overall player, and he ended up going 17th. But I'm going to bet on those traits. 2 years ago, Travon Walker, I was super high on him before many people were talking about him as a top player. And he ended up as like my 5th overall player, and he went number 1. And obviously time will tell how that works out. But Amarius Mims, he's my guy this year. Love what he offers, and there's definitely some question marks. There's some new faces on that offense. Is he going to be playing left tackle this year, replacing Broderick Jones? So there's definitely some questions. But I love the talent that he put on tape, even in just those 2 starts last year.
And he's a part of a tackle class that, quite frankly, Dan, I don't know about you, but I haven't seen a tackle class this awesome, preseason before. You got Olu Fashanu, Amarius Mims, Joe Alt is a guy I love. J.C. Latham you have in your top 10 as well. A bunch of other guys you have in your first round too. How special is this offensive tackle class? And is this the best one that you've seen so far in all your years doing this?
Yeah, I mean, immediately I think back to, when we saw 4 tackles going to top 13 a couple years ago with Andrew Thomas and Jedrick Wills and Mekhi Becton and Wirfs out of Iowa. I mean, and Wirfs, him and Andrew Thomas have really separated themselves. Wirfs moving to left tackle this year. We'll see how that works out. I have no doubt he'll be able to do it. People forget he was playing right tackle at Iowa just because the left tackle couldn't play right tackle, so they needed him there. And then when he got to the Bucs, that's where they needed him, right tackle. But he should be able to transition to left tackle, no problem. This tackle class has a chance to be special, like you mentioned. In my top 50, I had 8 offensive tackles in there, and that blew my mind. I knew this was going to be a good tackle class. I did not expect to have 8 tackles in my top 50, by far the most represented position. Joe Alt's a good player. Notre Dame fans don't like me because I have him like at 16, not the top 10, top 5 guy like other people have him. I have some questions about Joe Alt, but I still think he's going to be an NFL starter and a really good player. Had a great debut against Navy, so I can't wait to see him against Ohio State and then some of Clemson's guys later in the season. So Joe Alt's a good player. Patrick Paul from Houston, the top senior offensive tackle. He's a good player. Then Jordan Morgan from Arizona coming back from the injury. Tyler Guyton from Oklahoma, not as well known, but TCU transfer. You see him catch some touchdown passes maybe this year. So this is a tackle class with a lot of promise, and that's exactly what the NFL needs, right? I don't care who you are. All 32 NFL teams are looking for more tackle help, and this class should be able to offer that.
Absolutely. And, 2 blue chip prospects I think a lot of people are talking about right now are Marvin Harrison Jr., you have number 2 overall on your board, and Brock Bowers, a tight end from Georgia, who you have at number 6. And, I had Jordan Reed on a couple of weeks ago, and he actually told me, I think Bowers is a better prospect than Kyle Pitts right now. Just how special do you think Harrison and Bowers are? And when do you think we saw the last receiver prospect better than Marvin Harrison Jr.? And when was the last tight end prospect you think that was better than Brock Bowers?
Yeah, it's tough because Kyle Pitts, obviously, is he a receiver? Is he a tight end? Like, the lines are so blurred with him. But Bowers, he will give you a little bit more as a blocker, especially out in space. In line, I don't think he's a guy that you want, in line every snap and face it off against defensive ends, but you get him on the move and he will make it his mission to latch onto that safety and just drive him out of the play. We see him do that all the time at Georgia. He is such a special athlete for that size, 6'4", 235. He's going to run in the low 4.5s, maybe even gets in the 4.4s. He's that type of athlete. And, this year we'll see, with the new offensive coordinator, how that, they want to get the receivers more involved. You have a new quarterback. Quarterback is more of a pocket passer. We know Brock Bowers is going to get a lot of targets in that offense, but just interested to see his usage and just where they line him up. Is he going to be across the formation again? Brock Bowers, Kyle Pitts, to me was, I think it was Trevor Lawrence and then Kyle Pitts for me in that draft. So he was my number 2 overall player in that draft. Bowers, as much as I like him, he won't be as highly rated as Pitts was for me coming out of that draft, but he's still, the best tight end besides Pitts since, you could go way back. He is a special talent. With Marvin Harrison Jr., gosh, you have to go back. With all due respect to Jamar Chase, who I think is in that conversation, I think you're going back to AJ Green, Julio Jones, and then maybe even Calvin Johnson. This is a special one-of-one type of wide receiver with Marvin Harrison, because again, it's not like he's just doing it with. He's not just taller than everybody. He's not just faster than everybody. He has a savvy to him as a route runner, as a guy that is able to frame catches and away from his body, bring them in. His catch radius is silly. He looks like Spider-Man out there with some of these catches that he's making. And so we could talk for a while about Marvin Harrison Jr. without even mentioning who his dad is. And that's the amazing thing about it, is he's standing on his own 2 feet. It's not like he's holding on to these bloodlines as, keeping him afloat. He is his own special player. We saw, and honestly, I think you could tell right away watching that Rose Bowl game against Utah, Jackson Smith-Njigba set all those records. I came away from that game saying, okay, Marvin Harrison Jr. is the best receiver in college football. And I said it last summer, and Ohio State fans pushed back on me and said he's number 3 on his own team. It's like, guys, I'm telling you, this guy is different with how he's moving out there. He has a very veteran sense for how to play the position. And, this year, even though he's losing CJ Stroud, I don't know that we're going to see that much of a decline in terms of just production, because with Kyle McCord, who was his quarterback in high school. Mm-hmm. So there's already a set connection there. I think the only thing that might hurt him is Ohio State's wide receiver core is just so deep, with Egbuka part of that. Julian Fleming is, a really good receiver. And then even some of these young guys they want to get in the mix. Already hearing about Carnell Tate as a special freshman. So that Ohio State wide receiver depth chart, it's as good as it has been. It remains elite, and it looks like it's going to stay that way for another few years.
Absolutely. I think Harrison and Egbuka, I would argue, are the 2 best receivers in college football right now. And I love that you brought that up, how he's kind of standing on his own 2 feet. I said it before. I mean, you got Marvin Harrison, who's probably a top 10 receiver of all time. Marvin Harrison Jr., like you mentioned, is one of the best receiver prospects we've ever seen. I've said it before. I think, I feel bad for Marvin Harrison III, man, because the pressure that kid's going to have is going to be unbelievable. But
right. And honestly, like when you think of Ohio State, it sets these expectations, because it's just really hard. Okay, it's just Garrett Wilson, Olave, Harrison, Smith-Njigba, and then Egbuka. Just take those 5 guys. We won't even include Jamison Williams, who was once part of that wide receiver room. Just those 5 guys, if you rank them, it's hard to, who are you putting at 5? It's hard because if you feel like you're slighting somebody, but it's just such a loaded group of 5 receivers we've seen in a 3-year stretch.
Yeah, absolutely. It's probably the best receiving core in the NFL when they were in college. That's an insane receiving core. But I wanted to ask you too about, this quarterback class, because obviously at the top is Caleb and Drake. You won't find too many people that will put anyone else in that top 2 there. A lot of people have a different QB3 though, whether it's Michael Penix Jr., whether it's Bo Nix, whether it's anyone else. You have JJ McCarthy right now at number 19, the Michigan quarterback. What was it about his game that has you having him a lot higher than a lot of other draft analysts right now?
All the tools are there. 6'3", 210. He's a really good athlete. He can beat you with his legs. He has the arm. We haven't been able to really see him take over games because Michigan, that's not their MO. That's not their offense. They don't need him to do that. They have the best running back tandem in college football with Blake Corum, Donovan Edwards, and 2 guys that also made my top 50 and could be the first 2 running backs drafted in April. So, I don't necessarily blame Michigan, and that's how with the team Jim Harbaugh wants to be on offense. The ground game is going to set up the pass, and with JJ McCarthy, when they have needed him, he has been able to step up. Maybe you look at that TCU game last year, the 2 pick sixes, and some unfortunate breaks in that game. But JJ McCarthy has been, the intangible factor is off the charts. The coaches really praise him with his smarts and the way his leadership is, the way things just roll off his back, and how mistakes are not going to linger with him. He has that type of mental toughness. So a lot of things with JJ McCarthy are there. Now, do you want to see a little bit more, like take his game to the next level on the field this season? Yeah, that's a big part of this. So to start the season, JJ McCarthy is my number 3 quarterback. But I think Quinn Ewers is right there from Texas, who, we have to remember, he was basically a freshman last year in that Texas offense. But that Texas offense is set up this year to have a big season with those receivers, A.D. Mitchell coming in, Worthy. I'm not the biggest fan of, Worthy. I think he's a good player, but, he's 160 pounds. He needs to fix the drops, but he has speed. He has some route running, so he can still be a weapon in that offense. I'm eager to see what that Texas offense will look like, especially going to Tuscaloosa in week 2. So that'll be a lot of fun. We'll know right away if they're for real or not, but they have the talent on paper. So JJ McCarthy, Quinn Ewers, these are guys that have everything on paper. It's just you want to see a little bit more on the tape. And I'd even throw Riley Leonard in there, who doesn't necessarily have some of the physical traits, the elite physical traits you want at the position, but he throws a very catchable ball. He's very accurate. He knows where the void is going to be in the defense. I don't think people realize how efficient he was last year. And just as a both using his legs and then moving the ball through the air. This is for a first-year coaching staff, a Duke team that just looked awful the year before. So Riley Leonard, we'll see what he can do in year 2 as a starter there. And then I have to mention Bo Nix, who's my top senior quarterback, kind of changing the narrative last year. We saw what he did at Auburn, had, started off pretty hot as a freshman, tailed off as a sophomore and junior, goes to Oregon, is the starter there, and just got better and better throughout the season. So, Bo Nix is a guy that he was probably the one player that I hated leaving off my top 50 the most. Because I do think he can get into that top 50 mix, maybe even the first round. He has that type of potential. It's just where he's starting is going to be more that late 2, early 3rd round range for me.
Absolutely. Trevor Sikkema has him QB3 right now in the draft. And at one point, he even had him over Drake May. And I think he was talked out of it about a week later. But yeah, I think I love that. And, a guy I wanted to bring up with you is one of the guys you just talked about, is Quinn Ewers. So I think it's maybe the most boomer bust prospect in this draft. What do you think is the ceiling for Quinn Ewers? Do you think this guy can join Caleb and Drake at the top of the draft? And then what do you think, ultimately, is this guy a day 3 pick, maybe if everything goes completely catastrophe this year for Texas?
Well, if he's slated to be a day 3 pick, you almost you kind of wonder what is that going to mean for, does he just leave for the NFL after this season, no matter what? We know it's a very talented quarterback room down there in Austin. So, does he look to transfer? There'll be a lot of different options. It'll be interesting to see what he does if he is viewed as more of a mid to late round pick. But he has all the ability to be, and think about it. We rarely are we talking about 2 guys at the top in August, and then in April that they end up being the first 2 quarterbacks drafted. Right. 2 years ago, Zach Wilson comes out of nowhere and he's the 2nd overall pick. Obviously that didn't age well, but it still happens where we usually have some quarterback enter the mix that maybe we weren't necessarily talking about at this point in the process. So Quinn Ewers certainly could get himself into that mix with May and Caleb Williams at the top. He's got a lot to show to do so. I think he has the arm talent to do it. It's just a matter of staying on schedule. That's the biggest thing that he has to do. Because he has the arm to make all those deep throws, but sometimes they sail. Sometimes his placement's not there. The timing is off. So just getting his footwork right, his eyes on the same page, maturing as a quarterback. And, again, he graduated early from high school, goes to Ohio State when really he should have been a senior in high school. And then last year as a redshirt freshman at Texas, we should expect some bumps in the road. And so what does he look like this year as a sophomore? He's seen a lot. He's, his first really full offseason in Austin in that system. So Texas will be must watch this year for fans, for scouts, for everybody. They're going to be a factor in what happens in the college football landscape this year.
I love how you brought up how, the preseason top quarterbacks are never really the ones that you see actually be the top quarterbacks, because a couple of buddies of mine, when we hosted a show called Boomer Bust together, we look back at the top quarterback in the preseason from 2012 to now. And I think it was only Andrew Luck, Jameis Winston, and Trevor Lawrence were the only ones who went wire to wire QB1. So I think Caleb could do that this year, but like you said, it's insane. How we think we know who the top quarterbacks are, and it's not even close to what they actually are when the actual draft rolls around, though. But I want to ask you about some underrated players. Obviously, Amarius Mims is probably the top of your list as the guy that you think you're a lot higher on than a lot of other people. But are there any other players that you see on other people's boards a lot lower than you would have them right now?
Well, to be honest, I force myself not to look at anybody else's just because I don't want to be swayed in any way. But you see stuff on Twitter and things like that, and you have conversations with people. A player who I didn't hear much about, but I was really impressed when I watched him was Nate Wiggins at Clemson, the cornerback. He was my 12th overall player, my top 50. He has size, he has speed, and it's important when you watch tape to understand what part of the season you're watching, because you throw on the Wake Forest tape and you're like, okay, he's struggling. This is tough. All right, well, that was in September. Throw on the North Carolina tape, which is later in the season, and he looks like a totally different player. He's covering Josh Downs in space. He's picking off passes. He is reading Drake May. He is doing a really nice job. So I think he's a young player who got better throughout the season, and I think he earned that number 12 spot in my early top 50. I think this is a pass rusher class where there's no Will Anderson, but it's still you might not love these guys, but you like them. You like them a lot. And talking about everyone knows about Dallas Turner and JT Tuimoloau from Ohio State, Jared Verse, obviously, Chop Robinson, I think deserves a little more love at Penn State. He's another guy that it's just scratching the surface of how good he can be. Penn State always has these freaks, and it'll be interesting this year because they have the talent. It's tough to get past both Ohio State and Michigan. Do they have? They have the talent to do it. Do they have the coaching and consistency to do it? That's another question. Time will tell, but there's no question they have the talent. Guys like Chop Robinson, because in my top 15 and my top 50, only 2 teams had at least 3 players. Alabama with Kool-Aid at corner, Dallas Turner, and then J.C. Latham. But Penn State was the other one with Kalen King, Olu Fashanu, and then Chop Robinson. So people know who Chop Robinson is, but I think he is better than most people realize. And then, I think another underrated player go to the senior class. Josh Newton at a TCU is a really good cover man, has some size. He just has a good knack for timing down the field. He can read the eyes of the receiver, break up those passes. So I'm a big fan of him. And then a part of me just wants just that badass safety again, right? I miss the days when we had that awesome safety in the draft we could talk about. Cameron Kitchens from Miami, he has potential to be that guy. Last year had 6 picks. He showed that center field range that you want to see. Can he be that first round safety that we want so badly to, just be that, elite player that we're talking about? He starts the year, I think 27th in my top 50. So I'm not super high on him. I do question what his top end speed is going to be. He might be a 4.6 athlete. We'll see. But I really liked what he put on film last year. And I think, he's another guy that could take another leap here as he goes into his junior season. So a lot of interesting names on that top 50 to start the year.
And then on the flip side of that, I know you said you don't look at too many big boards, but when you look at Twitter and you're seeing a lot of guys get a ton of hype right now, is there any prospect that you're maybe pumping the brakes on just a little bit compared to where everyone else has them?
Washington fans, I've heard from them plenty this summer because I haven't been as high on some of their guys. 2 of them did make my top 50 with Rome, the receiver, and then Braylon Trice, the edge rusher. They were like 45 and 47 respectively. So they weren't super high, but they did make the cut. They were in my top 50. I'm not a huge Michael Penix guy. All the feedback that I got from scouts this summer on Michael Penix was between the 3rd round and the 5th round. There was not a single scout I talked to, and I don't know how all 32 teams feel, obviously, but there was not a single scout I talked to that had him higher than the 3rd round. And I understand where they're coming from because, the mechanics are an issue. Some of the timing and the ball placement things are an issue. Durability, and can he stay healthy? He did it last year, but in the past he had several injuries that will factor into the scouting report and ultimately where he is drafted. So I like Michael Penix. I think he's going to have another productive year this year. Washington is going to put up a lot of points. They will definitely be a factor in this final year of the Pac-12. But as a prospect, I think Michael Penix, he's got some work to do if he wants to be drafted in the first 2 rounds.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned that he's a 6-year quarterback. I think he had 2 torn ACLs. He had a major shoulder injury too. Yeah, I as much as I love Michael Penix Jr., I do see, the NFL maybe being a little bit lower on him than a lot of college football fans would be, honestly. But Dane, last question I want to ask you, I really appreciate your time. The offensive tackle class, I would think you would argue is probably the best right now. But is there a position in the draft too that you would say not the strongest, right now in this draft?
I think that linebacker is always a position where, not always, but the last few years I've been kind of left wanting a little bit more. Last year, we had Jack Campbell go in the top 20, a little bit of a surprise, but then, Drew Sanders went later than we thought. Trenton Simpson went later than we thought. This year's linebacker class, I really like Clemson's guys. I'm a big Barrett Carter fan. He's a really good athlete. But there are some questions about just, can he hold up as a take-on player, and, how is he going to fit in the NFL? A guy like Junior Colson from Michigan has a lot of the tools, but can he take that next step? I think only 2 linebackers made my top 50. The other one, the first one was Barrett Carter. The second one was who was it? I think it was Smile Mondon, the linebacker from Georgia, who is ready to take that next step. He's a really good athlete, moves really well. The movement skills for that size are really impressive. So I do like some of the linebackers in this class, but I don't think the linebackers they didn't get me as excited as some of these other positions did.
Absolutely. Dane, this is a fantastic conversation. Thank you so much for your time.
Anytime, man.